Toulouse, France. Engineers gather in a massive development center, where decisions are being made right now for one of the most complex aircraft on the planet. Meanwhile, 1,000 kilometers away in the United States, another team is working on the same thing, creating passenger airliners that will carry millions of people around the world. In a few years, their planes will hit the market. They will perform the same tasks, fly the same routes, and compete for the same customers. But very soon, it will turn out that these planes are much more different than they seem at first glance. For some, Airbus is more convenient because it handles a lot of automation. For others, Boeing is better because it allows the pilot to make more decisions. Airlines will begin to choose between two completely different approaches to aircraft design. This confrontation will develop into one of the most expensive and bitter corporate battles in history. In this video, you will learn why Airbus and Boeing are so different from each other and why this rivalry has shaped the future of global aviation for over half a century. In the mid-20th century, just one country controlled the skies above our planet. Imagine a situation where every second passenger in the world boarded an airplane made in the United States. At the very pinnacle of this gigantic empire, one undisputed leader had firmly established himself: the American Boeing Corporation. Their Seattle factories worked around the clock, churning out hundreds of aircraft. The secret of their success lay in their harsh military past. During World War II, these engineers assembled heavy bombers. They simply transferred this experience to peaceful civilian airliners. But their competitors truly experienced a shock when the Boeing 707 hit the airwaves, followed by the legendary Boeing 747. This double-deck giant seemed something fantastical and unreal to its contemporaries. Due to its enormous size, it earned the nickname Jumbo Jet, and practically single-handedly conquered all long-haul flights. The Americans sincerely believed that their monopoly would last forever and that no one in the world could even come close to their technology. But while everyone was counting billions in profits, on the other side of the world in Europe a real economic revolution was unfolding. Drama. Local aircraft factories in France, Germany, and the UK were on the brink of total collapse. They were producing decent aircraft, but they were producing them in small batches, making their production wildly expensive and inefficient. American competitors dominated the European market thanks to their low prices. It was in this moment of desperation that several countries decided on a crazy move. They created a single consortium, Airbus. Just imagine the chaos they plunged into. After all, engineers from different countries, speaking different languages, had to work together in a single factory to assemble a highly complex passenger airliner. In the workshops of Toulouse, where the first A300 model was being designed, people literally didn't understand each other, and the drawings were constantly being redone due to differences in the metric systems. In reality, everything was held together by colossal political pressure and the fear of losing the skies forever. And herein lies the main hook of this entire story, which predetermined the great battle of technology. The two companies began their journey with completely opposite goals. By the early 1970s, Boeing was acting as a strong, pragmatic market player. For them, aircraft manufacturing was purely a business, driven by Wall Street stock prices and maximum profits. They built planes to the specifications of wealthy American airlines, unwilling to change what was already selling well. But for the European Airbus consortium, this project was a matter of the survival of their entire industry. If their first A300 had crashed or simply failed to sell, Europe would have disappeared from the global aviation map forever, becoming a mere buyer of American aircraft. Therefore, Airbus initially took colossal financial risks, spent enormous government subsidies, and aimed for the immediate profit of creating a fundamentally new, incredibly fuel-efficient aircraft. It was a brutal clash of American pragmatism and the European desire to prove its right to exist, which ultimately completely changed the way we fly today. When you step into the cockpit of the most widely produced American airliner, the Boeing 737, you feel like you're entering a world that still values classic control. Before each pilot stands a massive, heavy control column, which in early versions was directly connected to the rudders on the wings and tail via kilometers of steel cables inside the fuselage. But even when Boeing also switched to electronic control cables on later, larger models, the company's core philosophy remained unshaken. American designers created the workplace with the clear conviction that the pilot is the absolute master of the skies. A human being is smarter and more important than any computer. Yes, electronics provide guidance and assistance, but if a pilot deems it necessary to force the plane into a tight turn to save passengers, the computer will complain, but allow it. Pilots revered this approach, as they always had the final say in controlling this multi-ton machine. While the first wide-body A300 was proving its incredible efficiency to the world, a plan for a true technological revolution was already brewing in the quiet laboratories of Europe. Airbus engineers decided to completely change the rules of the game. On their new narrow-body A320 model, they were the first in the world to get rid of heavy steel cables, rollers, and complex mechanical linkages. They created a system they called fly-by-wire, replacing mechanical controls with thin electrical wires. Now, when the pilot maneuvered, their movements were converted into a simple digital signal, which instantly traveled along wires to the onboard computer. This intelligent machine then decided how exactly to deflect the wing flaps. The pilots were shocked when they first peered into the A320 cockpit. The familiar control column, which pilots were accustomed to gripping tightly with both hands, was gone. In its place, a small, elegant plastic handle, a side stick, appeared to be at the side of the seat, very similar to a video game joystick. The pilots couldn't believe their eyes at first, as they were being asked to control a huge passenger airliner with the gentle movements of just their fingers. This is where the great intrigue was born, the one that continues to fascinate experts around the world. Along with the new control stick, Airbus introduced strict computer restrictions into its aircraft, which they called protection laws. European designers assumed that humans are inherently weak, prone to panic, and makes most fatal mistakes due to stress. The A320's onboard computer gained absolute control over the crew's actions in the air. If the pilot, in a moment of panic, pulled the side stick all the way back, the computer would simply ignore this dangerous movement. Smart electronics would physically block any maneuver that could lead to a drop in speed or a spin. Frightening myths and theories immediately sprang up in aviation circles about European aircraft being completely beyond human control and taking on a life of their own, obeying hidden algorithms. Of course, these are mere fabrications and conspiracy theories designed to attract attention. After all, automation was created for safety. However, it was precisely this technological rift that created a colossal problem. Now the two giants had to somehow sell their opposing ideas to airlines, which led to the beginning of the most ruthless commercial rivalry. When the Europeans rolled out their new planes from the hangars, they faced a virtually impossible task. After all, they needed to force the airlines abandon the familiar American aircraft. To break through this impenetrable wall of mistrust, Airbus management took the unprecedented step of launching an aggressive commercial attack on the home market of its main competitor. They began offering American and Asian airlines incredibly favorable terms that were simply foolish to refuse. The Europeans literally dumped prices on their new airliners to a level that barely covered production costs. Moreover, they offered unique contracts that allowed carriers to lease the aircraft for testing with the option to return them if they didn't like the aircraft. The secret of such unprecedented generosity lay in the colossal financial cushion that the European consortium received from the governments of France, Germany, and the UK. These included billions in government subsidies and preferential loans that allowed Airbus not to worry about immediate profits. While skeptics tried to explain Airbus's commercial breakthrough with non-market factors, Europe's real weapon became cheap money, and precise commercial calculations began to slowly but surely destroy the American monopoly. In Seattle, where Boeing was headquartered, at first there was only contemptuous laughter at the European attempts, but very soon this laughter gave way to real panic. When the largest American carriers began ordering European A320s en masse, Boeing management realized the scale of the disaster and launched a furious counterattack. They initiated a massive international scandal, openly accusing their European competitors of unfair play and violating all the rules of the free market. Endless, grueling legal proceedings began at the level of the World Trade Organization, where American lawyers spent years trying to prove that they were surviving solely on government handouts. Simultaneously with the legal battle, Boeing tried to hastily modernize its old, proven platforms to retain fleeing customers. Instead of building a completely new aircraft from scratch, which would have required too much time and billions of dollars, they decided to squeeze the maximum out of their old hit, the Boeing 737. The Americans offered airlines huge discounts, reminded them of the reliability of their time-tested technology, and assured them that the traditional control stick was much safer than European innovations. However, Airbus had one brilliant economic trump card hidden up its sleeve, which finally tipped the scales in their favor and literally turned the notion of profit upside down. European engineers came up with the idea of making the cockpits of all their aircraft, from small regional ones to huge long-haul ones, absolutely identical in terms of control logic. Thanks to this, A pilot who had flown a small A320 the day before could take a short retraining course in just a few days and sit at the controls of a huge wide-body airliner. For airline owners, this was a real salvation. After all, previously, they had to spend months of time and huge amounts of money training crews for each new type of aircraft. Now, logistics within airlines have been simplified to the extreme, and personnel costs have collapsed down. Boeing didn't have such a trick, as each of their models had its own unique cockpit, requiring lengthy and expensive pilot training. This pragmatic move allowed the Europeans to capture a colossal share of the global market. But both companies had no idea what dire consequences this race would have in the real skies, when pilots would be forced to face critical situations face to face. At the turn of the millennium, the theoretical debates of engineers moved to the real skies, where every mistake carried the heaviest price. The black boxes of crashed airliners began to clearly demonstrate how precisely opposing approaches to control behave in moments of danger. Airbus's intelligent automation truly saved hundreds of lives when, in thunderstorms or sudden gusts of wind, the electronics automatically leveled the plane, correcting the gross errors of frightened pilots. The computer simply blocked the panicked movements of the pilot's hands, preventing the plane from falling into a nosedive. But this coin also had a frightening flip side when the overly strict logic of defense turned into a dangerous trap. There were cases where, due to frozen sensors, the system produced incorrect data, leading to the disabling of automatic protection. Under these conditions, manual control required the utmost precision from the crew, and erroneous actions led to a loss of speed and the aircraft crashing. American engineering at the same time demonstrated completely different examples. On Boeing aircraft, pilots repeatedly performed true miracles, rescuing practically hopeless, severely damaged aircraft in situations where any computer would have long ago conceded defeat. When instruments on American airliners failed or pieces of the fuselage were torn off, the electronics began beeping frantically, demanding an immediate abort. But the crew, taking advantage of the lack of computer limitations, simply disabled the malfunctioning sensors and took complete control. Using the control column, the pilots forced the aircraft to fly and successfully landed them on the runway. Behind these miraculous rescues, there was always a tremendous amount of experience, piloting skills, and the rigidity of the airframe. In the early 2000s, it was the clash of ideas escalated into a grand race of giants, with both companies making diametrically opposed bets on the future of global aviation. In Toulouse, Airbus engineers decided to astound the world with their scale and built the incredible twin-wing Airbus A380, which became a true symbol of European grandeur. They believed in the prediction that people would fly between huge central airports and hubs on colossal aircraft, and from there board smaller planes. Everyone else, however, considered this idea a dead end and took a fundamentally different path, creating the Boeing 780 Dreamliner from the lightest composite materials. The Americans focused on cost-effective, direct flights between small cities without any transfers, bypassing congested metropolises. Time showed that the European giant A380 proved too expensive and impractical, leading to its production being discontinued, admitting commercial defeat. But this resounding victory turned the heads of the Boeing management so much that in pursuit of further profits they decided on a fatal step that almost destroyed the great American corporation. We've finally reached the core of this decades-long drama, which turned everything upside down and shocked the world. Behind the outward grandeur of the American corporation Boeing, an internal breakdown was quietly brewing, forcing the company to betray its traditions. It all began with the merger of the Americans with another major aircraft manufacturer, McDonnell's Dole. As a result of this deal, new people came to key positions in Seattle, people who were aircraft designers, but typical financiers from Ulster Street. The previous management had always been concerned with impeccable build quality and unreliable designs, spending 24/7 at the factories. Now, stock prices, cost-cutting, and the constant pursuit of profits took center stage. Veteran engineers quit in panic, complaining that accountants were forcing them to skimp on safety. Meanwhile, European rival Airbus was breathing down its neck, snagging lucrative contracts one after another thanks to its clever technologies. Opinions within the industry varied as to the reasons for the American giant's decline, but in reality, the crisis was caused by a change in internal management culture and a focus on cost reduction. This financial race led the Americans to make a colossal mistake that forever tarnished their reputation. When Airbus launched its incredible new A320 neo-economical airliner, Boeing began rapidly losing customers. To save the situation, Managers demanded that engineers roll out a response urgently, but there was no time to design a new aircraft from scratch. Then management decided to once again modernize the Boeing 737 airframe. They decided to attach new, huge and extremely heavy engines to this design. However, they were not physically positioned under the low wing, and they had to be moved forward and slightly upward. The aircraft itself flew perfectly. But due to the new engine position, the control column behavior changed at extreme angles of attack. It became too light, which violated strict certification rules. And then, for the sake of financial gain, a fatal decision was made. Instead of an expensive redesign of the airframe, financiers ordered a digital solution to the problem. Using a hidden computer program called MKAS. This system was supposed to automatically lower the aircraft's nose at critical moments, undetected by the crew, simulating the familiar weight of the control column. The most terrifying thing was that the existence of this program was concealed from airlines and pilots, in order to claim that the new airliner was no different from the old one, thus saving hundreds of millions of dollars on expensive simulator training. Ultimately, the American corporation fell into its own trap, creating the most terrifying paradox in the history of aviation. The MKAS computer system, hastily created, received data from just one small external sensor on the fuselage. When this sensor failed, Boeing's automation went crazy and began to point the aircraft's nose downward. The pilots, unaware of the existence of this hidden program, panicked and pulled back on the control column, trying to overpower the machine. Malfunctions in the MKAS system resulted in two major accidents involving Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines aircraft. This incident became the largest crisis in history. Corporation. Trust in the American certification system was completely destroyed, and aircraft of this series remained grounded for months. Today, the balance of power has shifted dramatically. Airbus confidently leads the market, reminding us all that in the skies, arrogance and greed always lead to tragedy.